A phone rings at midnight. A woman answers. The voice on the other end isn't asking for forgiveness, it's gloating. But before the mistress can finish her cruelest sentence, another voice cuts through the line. And in that single moment, everything falls apart. For everyone, Sarah had always believed that a good marriage required effort. Not the dramatic, movie version kind of effort. Not grand gestures or tearful reconciliations, but the quiet daily kind. The kind where you choose to show up even when you're tired, even when you feel invisible. Even when the man sitting across the breakfast table feels like a stranger wearing your husband's face. She was 34 years old, and from the outside, her life looked exactly the way she had planned it. A warm house in a quiet neighborhood. A son named Ethan, 7 years old, who still ran to her when he had nightmares. A career she had paused, temporarily, she always said, to be present for the years that mattered most. And a husband named Daniel, who was handsome and charming, and who had once looked at her like she was the only woman in any room. That version of Daniel felt very far away now. For the past 8 months he had been different. Distant in a way she couldn't quite name. He came home later. He laughed less. He started sleeping with his phone face down on the nightstand, which he had never done before. Small things. The kind of things that could mean nothing. The kind of things that when you lined them up one after another, started to mean everything. Sarah noticed. Of course she noticed. But noticing and accepting are two very different things, and she was not ready to accept what the notices were telling her. So instead, she found explanations. Work pressure. A difficult quarter. Stress he didn't know how to talk about. She told herself she was being understanding. She told herself she was being a good wife. What she was really doing was being afraid of what the truth would cost her. Afraid of dismantling the life she had spent years carefully building. Afraid that if she pulled on the one loose thread she could see, the entire fabric would unravel in her hands. So she left the thread alone. She made dinner. She helped Ethan with homework. She waited for Daniel to come back to her. She had no idea that the truth wasn't waiting for her permission. It was already on its way. The night it happened, Sarah had fallen asleep, on the couch waiting for Daniel to come home. It was a Friday. He had told her he had a work dinner, a client event that would run late. She hadn't questioned it. She had put Ethan to bed, watched something she couldn't remember afterward, and drifted off somewhere around 11 with the TV still on. Her phone woke her at 12:07 a.m. She saw the screen light up, unknown number, and almost let it go to voicemail. Late-night unknown calls were rarely anything good, but something made her answer. Some instinct she couldn't explain, a quiet pull in her chest that told her this call mattered. She answered. The voice on the other end was not what she expected. It was calm, composed, almost amused. A woman's voice, low and deliberate, like someone who had been rehearsing this moment for a long time. "Is this Sarah?" the woman said. Sarah sat up, the woman said. Sarah sat up. "Yes. Who is this?" And then, without hesitation, without shame, without even the courtesy of a pause, "I've been sleeping with your husband for 11 months. The words landed like a fist. Sarah didn't speak. She couldn't. The room felt like it had tilted sideways, and she was gripping the edge of the couch to keep from sliding off. Natalie kept talking. That was the thing that Sarah would remember most afterward. How Natalie kept talking, smooth and steady, like she was reading from a script she had written and rewritten until every word was a blade. She described their relationship with deliberate detail. She mentioned dates, hotels, restaurants. She said Daniel's name the way you say the name of something that belongs to you. She wasn't calling to confess. She wasn't calling because she felt guilty. She was calling because she wanted Sarah to know that she had already lost, that Daniel had already made his choice, that the marriage Sarah was fighting to hold together had, in Natalie's words, been over for a long time. She was calling to win, and for approximately 90 seconds, she was winning. Sarah sat there in the dark living room, the TV flickering silently, her whole body cold, listening to a woman dismantle everything she had believed about her life with surgical, smiling precision. Then everything changed. It came from the background, soft and distant and unmistakably real. A child's voice, small and sleepy the way children sound when they've been woken up past their bedtime and haven't fully surfaced from sleep yet. A little boy, and what he said was simple. Just 7 words, mumbled and groggy and completely innocent. "Mommy, who are you talking to?" Natalie paused, just briefly. A half-second interruption in her composure, like a crack in a window, small, but enough to let the cold air in. Sarah stopped breathing because she knew that voice. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat, the way she knew the sound of her own name. She had heard that voice every morning for 7 years. She had heard it call for her in the dark when he had bad dreams. She had heard it laugh and argue and whisper and cry. That was Ethan's voice. Her son. Her 7-year-old son, who was supposed to be asleep in his bed right now in their house, safe and tucked in and completely unaware of everything falling apart around him. He was not in his bed. He was not in their house. He was there, in Natalie's home, in the background of this phone call, asking his father's mistress who she was talking to in the middle of the night. Sarah's grief in that moment transformed. It didn't disappear. It sharpened. The hurt didn't go away, but it moved aside to make room for something harder and colder and far more focused. The tears that had been building behind her eyes evaporated. Her hands stopped shaking. She thought about every weekend Daniel had taken Ethan for what he called father-son time. Every overnight she had been grateful for because she thought it meant Daniel was trying to be more present as a father. Every morning Ethan had come home smelling faintly of a perfume she didn't recognize, and she had told herself she was imagining it. Daniel had been taking their son, their child, into that woman's home, into that relationship, into that lie. Ethan had been sitting at Natalie's table, sleeping under Natalie's roof, existing inside a secret that his mother was never supposed to know. On the other end of the line, Natalie had gone quiet. The confidence in her voice had shifted. Sarah could hear it, the faint dawning awareness that something had gone wrong with her plan. Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was very quiet, very steady. "Put my son on the phone." Natalie didn't put "et" and on the phone. Instead, she stumbled, for the first time in the entire call, over her words. She said something about it being late, about Ethan being fine, about Sarah overreacting. The smooth, rehearsed confidence from 60 seconds ago was gone. In its place was something that sounded almost like panic. She was already moving. She called Daniel. He didn't answer. She called again. On the third call, he picked up. And before he could speak, Sarah said, "Go get our son and bring him home right now. And Daniel, don't make me ask twice." The silence on his end told her everything she needed to know. While she waited, she sat at the kitchen table and she thought, not frantically, deliberately. She moved through her memories with the focus of someone solving a problem, not falling apart over one. She thought about Ethan's offhand comments over the past several months. The time he mentioned a new friend's house with a big backyard. The Saturday he came home and told her about a dog named Bruno, without saying whose dog it was. The morning he slipped and said "she" before quickly changing the subject when Sarah asked who he'd been with. She had filed all of it away without examining it too closely, because examining it too closely would have meant knowing, and she hadn't been ready to know. She was ready now. Daniel arrived home at 1:24 a.m., with Ethan, who was half asleep and confused and clutching his jacket. Sarah took her son, held him for a long moment, walked him upstairs, and tucked him back into his bed. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. She kissed him once. She turned on his nightlight. Then she walked back downstairs to where Daniel was standing in the kitchen, and she closed the door to the hallway so Ethan wouldn't hear. Daniel opened his mouth. "Sarah, I can explain." "I know," she said simply. "I know everything." And what was remarkable, what she would think about later in the quiet months that followed, was that she did. Not because Natalie had told her, but because the moment she stopped being afraid of knowing, every piece she had been carefully ignoring clicked into place on its own. The late nights, the phone face down on the nightstand, the overnight trips, the father-son weekends that had taken her son into another woman's house and asked him, without ever using words, to keep a secret too big for a 7-year-old to carry. She knew, and Natalie's phone call, meant to devastate her, had simply turned the lights on. Daniel had prepared for a version of this conversation. Sarah could see it in him, the way he stood, the particular way he ran his hand through his hair, the careful arrangement of his expression into something that was designed to look remorseful. He had a version of this conversation ready, probably more than one. He was a man who believed, deeply and somewhat pathetically, in his own ability to talk his way through things. Sarah didn't give him the version he had prepared for. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw things, or demand to know how he could do this, or ask him if he ever loved her. She had seen women do those things in movies, and she had always thought it looked like handing someone a weapon, and then being surprised when they used it. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table. She folded her hands in front of her, and she talked to him the way you talk to someone when you have already made up your mind and you are simply completing a necessary formality. She told him what she knew, systematically, without drama. The 11 months, the hotels, the father-son weekends repurposed as cover. Ethan in that house. Ethan building a relationship with a woman Daniel had apparently planned to replace his wife doubly if, while that wife was home, telling herself she was being understanding. With each thing she named, Daniel's prepared expression shifted. The rehearsed remorse gave way to something more genuine, not guilt exactly, but the particular discomfort of a man who realizes the conversation he planned for and the conversation he is actually in are two completely different things. He tried several approaches. He was sorry. He hadn't meant for it to go this far. Natalie had called without his knowledge. He had never meant to involve Ethan. It had gotten complicated. He still cared about Sarah, about their family. "Daniel," she said, and there was something in her voice that made him stop. "Ethan was in that house. Our son was in that house. Whatever you want to say to me about us, say it. But there is nothing you can say to me about Ethan that makes that acceptable. Nothing." He went quiet. And in that silence, something concluded. Not loudly. Not with the dramatic finality of doors slamming or dishes breaking. Just a quiet, irreversible closing, like a book being shut after the last page. Sarah looked at the man she had been married to for 9 years, and she understood, with complete clarity, that she was not trying to save anything anymore. She was simply deciding what came next. Natalie had called at midnight because she wanted to win. That was the only honest way to describe it. She wasn't calling out of guilt or honesty or some misguided desire to do the right thing. She was calling because she wanted Sarah to feel small. She wanted Sarah to understand that Daniel had chosen her, that the marriage was already a formality, that Sarah's role in the story was simply to step aside and let the inevitable happen gracefully. It was a power move, calculated, deliberate, and almost elegant in its cruelty. It was also the single greatest mistake Natalie could have made, because in the process of making that call, in the process of laying out 11 months of an affair with detailed confidence, Natalie had done something she almost certainly hadn't intended to do. She had created evidence, a phone record of a call made from her number to Sarah's phone at 12:07 a.m., a witness, Sarah herself, to an explicit verbal confirmation of the affair. And most critically, she had placed Sarah's minor child at her residence overnight without his custodial parents' knowledge or consent, and she had done it on a call that Sarah could now describe in full to a family law attorney. Sarah made that call at 9 a.m. the following morning. Her attorney, a calm and thorough woman named Patricia, listened to the full account without interrupting. When Sarah finished, Patricia was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Tell me about the child being present." What had seemed to Natalie like a midnight victory began to look, in the clear light of morning, like a comprehensive act of self-destruction. The affair itself was damaging to Daniel in the divorce proceedings, but the repeated exposure of a minor child to an extramarital relationship. Without the primary custodial parent's knowledge was something else entirely. It spoke directly to judgment, to the question of what environment was appropriate for Ethan, to custody. Natalie had called to take something from Sarah. Instead, she had handed Sarah the most powerful tool she would have in the months ahead, the truth documented, witnessed, and delivered in Natalie's own confident, self-incriminating voice. The irony was almost perfect. The woman who had called to make Sarah feel powerless had, in roughly 4 minutes on the phone, given Sarah everything she needed. The months that followed were not easy. Sarah would not pretend they were, not to herself, and not to anyone else. Divorce, even when it is the right thing, even when you are the wronged party, even when you are walking away with your head level and your reasons clear, is still loss. It is the dismantling of a life that was real, even if the foundation underneath it had been quietly rotting. There were hard days. Days when Ethan cried because he didn't understand why Daddy didn't live at home anymore. Days when Sarah sat in the parking lot of the grocery lot for 10 extra minutes because she didn't quite have the energy to go inside and perform normalcy for strangers. Days when she caught herself starting to reach for her phone to tell Daniel something funny that happened, before remembering. But there were also other days. The custody arrangement favored Sarah significantly. Patricia had built a careful, thorough case, and the evidence of Daniel's choices spoke clearly. Ethan lived with Sarah. Daniel had scheduled visits. The settlement was fair. Daniel had scheduled visits. The settlement was fair, more than fair, and Sarah walked out of her marriage with the house, the financial stability she needed, and most importantly, the protected and consistent presence in her son's life that she had fought for. 6 months after the midnight call, Sarah sat on the back porch on a Saturday morning, while Ethan played in the yard. It was an ordinary morning, coffee going cold, sunlight moving through the trees, her son narrating some elaborate game to himself in a voice too quiet for her to make out. She wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. She wasn't listening for a car in the driveway or a key in the door. She wasn't constructing explanations for absences or talking herself out of suspicions. She was just there, present and quiet and free. Somewhere she knew Daniel was navigating the consequences of his choices. And somewhere Natalie was discovering what it looked like to have the version of Daniel that existed outside the SS. Secret, the real one, ordinary and flawed, and no longer made romantic by the thrill of what he was risking. Sarah found she didn't spend much time thinking about either of them. What she thought about was Ethan, about rebuilding, about the strange, sturdy things she had discovered about herself in the wreckage of the last year, that the woman she had been afraid to be alone had turned out to be someone she genuinely didn't mind the company of. She had lost a marriage, but she had stopped losing herself. And on a quiet Saturday morning with coffee going cold and her son's voice carrying across the yard, that felt like more than enough. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive gently. Sometimes it comes in at midnight wearing someone else's confidence, intending to hurt you. But every now and then, inside the cruelest moment, something slips. A small voice, an unguarded word, an accidental revelation. And suddenly you can see everything clearly. Not because someone chose to be honest with you, but because the truth simply got tired of waiting.